includes the temperature, the feeling of your body. That includes the sounds of traffic, people around you. It also includes any emotional states you're feeling. Just start to notice those things. As free of judgment as possible. You don't need to get involved with the stories of all those things. Just start to notice them. If you've gone off into any kind of storyline or spacing out or anything, just come back, maybe focusing on one thing. Maybe just take a moment to focus in on the sounds around you. Look in your body and see if there's any very subtle, pleasurable sensation in the body. One place that's interesting to explore is the palms of the hands. So we're not looking for anything obvious, very subtle. Just see if in the palms of your hands you can notice a slight, very slight, pleasurable sensation. Can't find it in the palms of your hands, maybe the back of your head, or just try another place and see if you can find a very slight, pleasurable sensation in the body. To listening, just listen to all the sounds around you. But if you can, try to divorce yourself a little bit from this, the names of the sounds, like traffic or air conditioner. Just try to hear sound as a sensation and see if you can notice a slight pleasure in experiencing sound is sensation. In other words, relax into the act of listening, just for a moment. About that. Was anybody able to get a slight feeling of pleasure in the sensation of listening? Did anybody have a hard time staying away from storyline? Yeah. Does anybody want to share how that process moved from just being aware to moving to storyline?
I noticed I was feeling anxiety, and then immediately just went to like, why am I feeling anxiety? And
right.
So on and so forth. Just
right.
Snowball.
The mind wants to solve things. I mean, that's what the mind is designed to do, to notice and to solve things. So when you're like, there's nothing to solve, the mind will start to get agitated. So, yeah, Mike explained like, oh, anxiety, wanting to figure out why. Anybody else? Yeah.
I was feeling angry, so then as well, like I started to think, well, why am I angry?
Yeah,
and
right.
then I went,
Well, it should be interesting, anxious and angry. Maybe we should just have like Fight Club. Yeah, right. Yes, and the same kind of thing, trying to figure out, oh, why is it?
why is it?
Yeah, what's the nature of my anger? Yeah. Anybody else?
Once I heard that there was names to the sounds, my mind started naming the sounds.
Yeah, right.
Door.
Yeah. Yeah.
Car.
Yeah, like don't name the sounds, and you're like, oh, yeah, great. So I want to talk about one of the greatest tools, actually. So this class is called a Buddhist toolkit for dealing with difficult situations. One of the greatest tools is starting to distinguish between three types of phenomena that are always happening. Right? One is a somatic experience. What do I mean by somatic?
In your body.
Yeah, just physical, bodily. What's happening in the physical body. That then gets interpreted through emotion. Right? Then we overlay, if you imagine like, when you're in school, you have what are those things called?
Overhead projector.
Yeah, with what do you put on them?
Transparency.
Transparency. Yeah. So imagine like three transparencies. The first transparency is the somatic experience. Then what you're going to overlay on that transparency is emotion. What do you think might be the last overlay?
Verbal thoughts?
Yeah, verbal thoughts. Yeah, that could. Yeah, articulation of the emotion or something. But what else? I'm looking for something similar. But what might be?
Story that goes with the emotion.
Boom. Yeah, that's it. Right. Storyline. So you get the somatic, the emotion, and then the storyline. What's incredibly difficult to differentiate is the emotion from the storyline. I mean, all three are incredibly difficult to differentiate. Because let's say I'm getting anxious. I have anxiety. Boom, it's instantaneous. This will always be like that. Whatever the anxiety might be, or the story, everything gets fused together. Or anger, if anger arises. Or desire. It's like, boom, everything's fused together. I must have cocoa cereal right now. Like, the desire is like, oh, boom, right? And what we rarely ever notice is somatically what's happening there. What's the physical experience that's happening before we feel like we must have Cocoa Puffs right now. Right? There's a fascinating whole somatic experience that we usually bypass, and we go right to emotion and storyline. So one beautiful tool is just to learn to differentiate those three. and so usually if you're having a strong emotion, one great way to start to practice with that is to look at, oh, what's the somatic? Boom, and that's all. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to change anything. The minute we're trying to push away from an experience, that experience has control on us. So we have anxiety, we feel like, I don't want anxiety. Anxiety is bad, I want to get rid of that. Boom, that now has more control over you, more power, right? But if we lean into it with a gentle curiosity, if we just say, oh, okay, here's anxiety, it's coming up. I've had it before, I'll probably have it again, but let me explore what's the somatic experience that's happening here. Let me just try to identify one or two things that are physically happening in the body. And that's it. That's the end of your practice, the beginning and end of your practice. Just learning to start to get a sense of that somatic. One way of thinking about meditation is a little bit like being a doorkeeper. Like, so you open and close the door for people coming. What you don't is a good doorman or doorwoman. What you don't do is hold the door closed for some people, like, be like, hold it, you can't come in. And also what you don't do is open the door and then follow somebody in. And before you know it, you're at the pool with Trump, and it's like an hour later. So what we're trying to do is just open and close the door for whoever's coming in or out. And a great way to do that is to constantly come back to the somatic experience. So if you don't have a daily meditation practice, a very useful daily meditation practice would be to start with 5 minutes a day. Or if you find you fail in that, start with 3 minutes a day, commit to 40 days, and just work with trying to get in touch with your somatic experience. And if you have a strong emotion coming up, if you can, during that point, get in touch with the somatic experience, you have had a major success that day. We had a big day, we were driving, we had a lot going on, and I was having a meltdown as I was, losing things. And Annie said, my partner Ann said, why don't you try some of the practices? And I was just like, to be blunt, I was like, no, I'm F you, basically. I didn't. I said, let's talk later. So here's a little technique. You can only do this on your own. Don't suggest it to a partner. It's just basic relationship advice. If somebody's having a meltdown, you don't be like, oh, why don't you meditate? It doesn't work. So this is a one-way tool. It never works two ways. You can't ever introduce it to somebody in the midst of an emotional difficulty. But you can introduce it to yourself in the midst of emotional difficulty. So if I had that idea, I could have done it, right? But if she had that idea, forget it, because I'm already irritable, and that's just going to compound the irritability. But if I'm in the middle of being stressed out or having some emotional issues, and if I think, oh, what's the somatic? What is the nature of the somatic experience? I've had a major success that day. You can screw up the rest of the day, you're fine. Like you've had, in your spiritual evolution, you've had a major success that day. Which is, because every different strong emotional experience is going to have a different somatic quality. And that's a fascinating thing to start to get in touch with. Anxiety is going to function in the body differently than anger. Like, for example, I one time was in the midst of a major, really intense anger, and I had this thought, why don't I explore the somatic experience? And I got really quiet, I just stood there, I was standing in the yard, and I felt I just want to feel what's happening in the physical body. What I felt was really interesting. I felt energy rising up and then coming out my arms into my hands. It was like this flow of, and I thought, isn't that interesting? It's like, what do we oftentimes want to do when we're really mad? We want punch something. And that same energy is like that movement of energy is, that's what I felt. But I was divorced from the emotion. In that moment, I was divorced from the emotion and from the storyline. I just got curious, somatically, what's happening? And what was amazing is the more I got in touch with that physical feeling, the less the emotion and storyline had a hold on me. And within a couple of minutes, the anger was gone. And I was amazed. Like, I was like, whoa, this stuff actually works. But now what would have happened if I expressed that anger? Let's say, what would have happened if I expressed it to somebody? The person I was angry at. You could feed into it. How long would that last? There's this old notion like, just express it and then be done with it, But if I said, God damn it, just expressed it, would I have been done with it? No, that just sits in the system for a long time. It might have sat in the system for days and sometimes for years, right? But what happened was, as I just approached it from the somatic and got curious, I realized, oh wow, interesting. There's this energy, pranic flow happening, and then suddenly the grip of the emotion and the grip of the storyline started to fade. Now, did it come back? Yeah, of course. I mean, I have issues all the time. But the more you practice this, the less powerful the issues become. Because you just get better practiced at it. Somebody cuts you off in traffic. You might flip them the bird, and then you go like, oh, somatic. What's a somatic? And then look at what's happening. And then slowly the emotions, they never leave, right? I'm not suggesting that you are not going to have mental afflictions. I'm suggesting those mental afflictions will come and go just like every other guest coming through the door, right? I'm not suggesting that you're ever going to get rid of your anxiety. I'm just suggesting that the anxiety is going to come and go through that door like every other person coming through the door, right? Oh, here it comes again. And then, so this is just a beautiful practice to start to work with. And so really, it's a foundation for some of the Lojong practices. The Lojong practices require some level of reflectiveness. And this is the ultimate level of reflectiveness. What's happening in those three things? Now, what are some ways of undermining that process? Say I want to get more in touch with what's happening in the somatic experience. And I want to learn to differentiate between those three. What are the three? What's the first? What's the second? And what's the third? Story. Now, somebody give me an example of something that they have dealt with in the last week. A difficult emotion. A difficult experience. Or you could say, like, I have a friend who...
Okay, I'll give you one. So, I have a young dog that's sick.
Yeah.
And I got a voicemail from the vet saying they needed to talk to me, like, soon.
Right, yeah.
And so I was afraid they wanted me to put him down.
Right.
So the semantic.
Well, no, so there we go. We got a classic thing. So what do you think? We're just going to speculate. Tell me your name.
Kate.
Kate. We're going to speculate on Kate's situation. It might not be her situation, but we're going to speculate. She heard that voicemail. What might somatically have happened? Stomach. Yeah, classic. What else?
Neck.
What's that?
Shoulder. Neck.
Yeah, shoulder. Yeah.
Breathing.
Yeah, breathing for sure. I guarantee you her breath changed. How did it change is going to be different for all of us. Again, a point of interest to explore. What else? Racing heart. Yeah, racing heart. What else?
Sweaty palms.
Yeah, classic, sweaty palms. Yeah. Now, what's the next transparency? The emotion. What might have happened?
Fear.
Yeah, fear. What else? Sadness. Worry. And then what's storyline?
My dog's gonna die.
Yeah, my dog's going to die. Or in this case, the doctor's going to ask me to put down my dog, which means I have to make a decision, right? I mean, decisions are the worst. That's why people hate to merge on highways, because you have to make a decision. decision. I'm gonna go in front of that car, but it's just this little micro decisions that are exhausting. So these are the storylines. So the emotions. Usually when I bring this up, somebody throws a storyline in when I ask for emotions, but we nail it. The emotions were just fear, right? So, there weren't storylines, and then we overlay storyline on top of that. So that's an intelligence that we can develop, and that will serve us for the rest of our lives. So that's what I want to encourage us to start to play with, is this intelligence of being able to differentiate these three. You can even do it with other people, but don't tell them you're doing it as it's happening, right? So I'm going to be like, oh man, I notice you're having a major, you're majorly frustrated, and I see maybe there's some, tension in the body, and but you can notice it and see, what's a storyline that this person is immediately going to. Now my question was, if I want to not have that intelligence, if I want to not be able to pay attention to that, what are some things I could do? Obsess, yeah. I could always go right to storyline.
Yeah, go right to the worst possible.
Yeah, totally. Worst possible scenario. Yeah. What else? Just in terms of a general intelligence, what are some things I could do?
How can I fix it?
Yeah, I just work on fixing things, yeah.
Take a step away.
What's that?
Avoid it.
Avoid it. Yeah, avoid it. Just, what are some ways I could avoid it?
Everything's fine.
Yeah, everything's fine. What else? What are some classic avoidance techniques?
Procrastination.
What's that? Yeah, drink. Drinking is one of the best ways, because what you're doing is you're numbing the mind. And a numb mind is a non-articulate mind, and a numb mind is incredibly pleasurable. I mean, that's why, and so what's another way to numb the mind?
Look at your phone.
Yeah, look at the phone. Classic way. I mean, these are, what else? What else?
TV.
Yeah, TV. Food, yeah.
Music.
Video game I just downloaded.
Yeah, music, yeah, all these ways. I had something, food's one of my issues, and I had something amazing happen the other day. I was eating cereal for dessert, because you have to have dessert after dinner. So I was having a bowl of cereal, and then I was feeling so full, and I was feeling like guilt around eating too much. And the thought that came to my mind was, you should eat more. And I really, so I'm like pouring another bowl of cereal. And then I stopped to analyze, wait, what's actually happening here in the mind? The mind was uncomfortable and feeling guilty for having eaten too much. And the solution was to eat more. And it was so clear, it was so physical. It's like, oh yeah, you're having this unpleasant experience. Just have another bowl of cereal and then a bowl of sugar. And I was like, and at first I was going for it. I was like, oh, okay, fine, that's a really good idea. Thanks. And I was like, wait a second, who the hell's in charge here? That's ridiculous. But that's the kind of logic that the mind deals with. So these are all ways we can basically numb the system to not have this intelligence. And what's the thing we go to when we're feeling an unpleasant emotion? When we have that key experience, loneliness, depression, anxiety, fear, anger, when we have that key experience, that's the moment when we can really start to infuse this. And that's also the moment where we go to those things to try to mitigate that. So again, just an invitation to start to play with some of these ideas. I was going